Hello everybody, we are doing half of chapter 2 of Come See the Fair. The reason that we're doing half today is because there's over 30 pages, so it's going to be really long. So we'll do half this week and half next week, and all the videos will be about 20 minutes done. Alright, so chapter 2 is called All Aboard. Time passes differently on trains. The world outside is made to stand aside safely behind wide windows. The thrum and huff of the engine is as hypnotic as rain on the roof. Moments become minutes, hours become days. The train was crowded and Ava paced up and down the aisle, carefully evaluating her seating options. Finally, she chose a place opposite a boy in white linen, also traveling alone. He was busy sketching in a thick brown book, lank hair fallen in front of his eyes. He didn't look up. Ava took him in quickly, just as she might have at a seance. A year older than she, maybe 2. He drew in charcoal, his fingers absolutely thick with the stuff, but he was well practiced, his cuffs and shirt sleeves spotless. There was something extreme, almost dire, in his concentration, like there might be terrible consequences if he let his charcoal make a false mark. The set of his lips somehow made her sad. The train ran on. The boy continued to draw. By and by, the conductor came along to tear her ticket. The boy spent some time searching for a particular stick of charcoal in his things and then returned to his drawing. Still, he did not look up. The long shadow of the train shortened as the sun climbed through the sky. Noon passed. Sunlight began to shine in through the window. The drawing boy tipped his notebook to take advantage of the shifting light, and Ava's eye was pulled down to the page in front of him. She gasped. Great buildings, towers, domes, an unending forest of columns and archways. It was the white city from her dream. And then they actually give us a picture of what he's drawing. Does anybody recognize that building? It's from Chicago. That place you're drawing, said Ava. Where is that? The boy looked up with a start. Slowly, as he stared, his eyes grew wide. What? What is it? Ava said, patting herself in alarm. Like, is my hair messed up? In answer, the boy began to flip back in his notebook. I drew this, he said, about a week ago. And finding his page, he turned the sketchbook outward. It was she. And she hadn't worn her hair that way in, well, about a week. Ava lifted her eyes from the notebook. The boy stared straight back at her. Oh, and here's the picture that he drew of her. So that's kind of what our girl looks like. Ava. Who are you? They said almost together. After a long moment of wobbly silence, Ava said, I'm Ava Root. And who's that? Asked the boy, as if he expected her to say, like, a fairy princess, or I'm the Queen of England. Ava shrugged. Well, who are you? Oh, said the boy, I'm Henry Poole. All right, Henry Poole, said Ava. Why have you been drawing me? Henry's cheeks colored. Well, honestly, I didn't know, he said. Didn't know what? That it was you? Ava gave her head a gentle shake, trying to tumble this idea into place. You expect me to believe that you drew that picture a week ago without even knowing it was me? Henry frowned. I don't think I expected anything. Here, where were you last week? Ava scrunched up her brows and thought, Michigan? Henry nodded. I was in Philadelphia. I'm almost always in Philadelphia. Again, Ava shook her head. But I've never been to Philadelphia. Henry tipped his head as if to say, you see? He shut his notebook. Maybe I should explain. Yes, Ava said. I think you probably should. I'm not supposed to draw. Or at least, not as much as I do. My father, have you heard of him? Ava raised her eyebrows. I don't know. Oh, said Henry. His name is Hiram? Hiram Poole? Ava had not heard of him. He's an attorney in Philadelphia. People know him. Anyway, he doesn't think drawing is a suitable use of a young man's time. He says art is for women and Italians. This was ridiculous, but it didn't seem to amuse Henry one bit. I have to hide it, he said. I can't let him see me draw, or anyone who might talk to him, which is a lot of people. So mostly I draw from memory and after dark. I like to use a gas lamp because the light is steadier, but I think Father's been catching on. He started keeping them in his study, and I have to go in and ask, and then he'll want to know what I'm doing. Ugh. He can always tell when I'm lying. It's no good. So, perhaps a week and a half ago, I shut myself in the room to draw after supper. I took a candle because, well, the light isn't always steady, but it's better than nothing, and it's certainly better than asking my father for a lamp. I was just about to settle in and begin drawing, but I had to use the, Henry's cheeks grew pink again. I had to use the necessary. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe the chambermaid lit it. But when I sat down, the paper looked different in the candlelight. Different? Asked Ava. What do you mean? It looked, said Henry, flipping back in his sketchbook, like this. He held the book up to reveal a wide panorama. That was already drawn? Asked Ava. No, said Henry. I drew it after. But that night, it was like the candlelight was helping. It was like giving me hints. Now Henry turned the book around to look at his drawing. I never used to draw buildings. The line has to be so straight, and the perspective is so rigorous. Ava cleared her throat. And what about me? Henry looked up. Oh, yeah. Well, it didn't stop. The next day, there was just so much more I needed to draw. Buildings, sure, but machines too. Flowers, ships, statues, guns, vases, furniture, everything. And you. Ava's cheeks suddenly felt very warm. It's not like drawing from memory, said Henry, or even from imagination. I'm not moving things from my mind onto the paper. It's like I'm trying to pin something down that's floating between the page and me. Like it's somehow inside the light. Do you get what I'm saying? Ava wasn't sure. Anyway, this went on, and eventually I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to know what I was drawing. So for a whole day, I sat in the library. I thought for sure it would be Europe. Venice, maybe someplace in Italy. I knew that it has to exist somewhere outside my head, but I just couldn't find it. And I was becoming frantic. I was showing people, asking if anyone recognized the buildings. Finally, a watch salesman outside of McGinty said it was the Columbian Exposition. The Columbian what? Henry nodded. Exposition. But everyone that I've talked to about it just calls it the World's Fair. Deep in Ava's mind, something blossomed like a wildflower. Fortunately, said Henry, my aunt and uncle live out in Chicago, and when I telegraphed them, they invited me to come see the fair. Come see the fair. This caught Ava's attention. What did you just say? The fair, said Henry, frowning. The Chicago World's Fair. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. She felt like she'd seen a ghost, too. Would you believe me, said Ava, if I told you that the same thing happened to me? Henry blinked. What? He watched her carefully as she spoke, the sudden spark of the candle, the summons in her mind. Ava could almost feel his attention, warm like a sunny spring breeze in a room too long shut up. What she said was true, if decidedly incomplete. She couldn't quite work out how to tell him about her seances without admitting that she was a fraud. And now, in the little silence that settled between them, she found herself... Oops, sorry about that. Let me fix it. There we go. Yeah. There we go. And in the little silence that settled between them, she found herself desperate for Henry to believe her. Yes, he said, It is the same, isn't it? The candle and the fair? Ava nodded eagerly. What do you think it means? She said. Henry sighed. I don't know. But one thing is clear enough. What's that? We've got to go see the fair, said Henry. Together. But where will you stay in Chicago? Ava hadn't even considered this. Oh, she said, I'll find a hotel room. A hotel room, said Henry. But what about your parents? Where are your parents? Ava opened her mouth to answer and shut it again quickly. What could she say? She didn't even know enough about parents to invent a plausible lie. My parents. The thing is, I don't, Oh, Henry seemed to understand her stammering better than anything she could have said directly, and once more he blushed. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Well, if you'd like to come stay with us, I'm sure my aunt and uncle would be happy to have you. Really? This seemed incredible to Ava. She'd slept in many, many beds in her life, but none of them had ever come free. Are you sure? Henry had no doubts. There's more than enough room in the house, he said. They love to have company. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. And they don't have any children of their own, so they let me come and go as I please, like an adult. It's tremendous. Henry's aunt, Mrs. Isabella Overstreet, was lovely. She was there, apple-cheeked and waiting on the steamy platform at Central Station when they arrived, and she smiled with genuine warmth when Henry introduced her to Ava. She was going to look for a hotel room, said Henry, but why no, of course you must stay, said Aunt Isabella, handing Ava's small bag to her coachman. Any friend of Henry's is a friend of ours. Ava had never really experienced a friend before. The closest thing in her experience was Mrs. Blodgett. This, however, was so much better. As the coach jostled south along State Street, she braced herself to dodge Aunt Isabella's polite inquiries. Where was Ava coming from? Who were her parents? What first brought her to Chicago? But they never came. At first, Ava was surprised at this. She could see Aunt Isabella thinking, noticing, wondering. But Henry and his aunt were well-to-do, and in their circles, the proper introduction entitled a person to certain dignities and comforts. Aunt Isabella didn't want to say anything that might lead to embarrassment, so she kept her questions to herself. Slowly, Ava felt her graciousness descend like a warm, soft towel, and slowly she began to feel welcome. Soon, Henry and his aunt fell into an easy chatting rhythm, gossiping about family, sharing the news. Ava's eyes, however, were irresistibly drawn to the window. Just outside the coach, the great machine of the city was chomping at the bit. Ava, said Aunt Isabella, and Ava looked up with a start. Have you ever been to Chicago before? Ava shook her head. Never. Aunt Isabella smiled and called out to the coachman. Willie, she said, let's take our guests through the Loop. The Loop, Chicago's beating heart, seemed to Ava like a bird's nest built into a steam engine. She'd never seen anything like it. Industry everywhere, smokestacks, workshops, gas lamps, construction, a roaring torrent of shirtwaists and dented lunch pails. Trolleys thundered up and down the riven, dusty streets, coaches and drays and omnibuses on every side, and far above it all, the sun lurked, sullen and belligerent, behind a thick veil of soot. It was filthy and rusty and thrumming and dense. It smelled like oil and hot iron. Ava could not bear to look away. It's so, she stammered, and Aunt Isabella smiled. Yes, she said, Chicago is very different from Philadelphia, I think. We were a much younger city, even before the fire, and now... The fire? Of everything they discussed that day, this question alone seemed to leave a scruff on the surface of Aunt Isabella's good cheer. 22 years ago. Nearly destroyed the entire city. But we are resilient in Chicago, so we build back up again. That is why everything here is so new, so modern. And I dare say that is why the fair is so fantastic, really. We have practice in making cities. And what a great city they had made out of the ashes of the great fire. Buildings rose up in orderly rows on all sides, massive, almost incomprehensibly tall, like ranks of giant teeth. It was only when the traffic ground to a halt that Ava saw what had been caught between them. There, shoved off into an alleyway, was the mottled corpse of a draft horse, its skull, oddly clean and white, peering out through the open flesh of its cheek. It was sick, and it was intoxicating. Ava needed some air. "Willie," said Aunt Isabella, "that's enough for the loop, I think." She leaned forward and patted Ava's knee. "It can all be a bit much at first." But Lake Michigan was only blocks away, and the water, steely blue that afternoon, stretched out as far as Ava's eye could see. Scow schooners dotted the harbor, flitting between the steamboats and freights like white-winged doves, and the breeze blew gently, rinsing away the musty fog of the loop. Ava let out a sigh. She had never seen so much water. It seemed to go on forever. "There," said Aunt Isabella, "that's better." Mr. and Mrs. Overstreet's Prairie Avenue home was not far south, but when they arrived, Ava felt as if she were in an entirely different world. Here, the broad street was lined with trees and stately homes, and everywhere the place was unhurried and leisurely. Mr. Jefferson Overstreet had come home not long before them, and he laid his newspaper aside with genuine interest as his wife presented Miss Ava Root. It was only when Uncle Jefferson finished his bright and unqualified welcome that Ava realized she'd been waiting for someone to correct the mistake. She surely didn't belong here, in this gleaming mansion of marble and stained glass. Surely someone would object to this. But nobody did. And soon there was no denying it. Ava was a guest of the house. The chambermaids rushed off to prepare her room, and Ava took her place upon the settee. Henry was eager to get to the fairgrounds directly, and as soon as it was all mannerly to do so, he asked when they might go. "Oh, goodness," said Uncle Jefferson, "not until morning, I shouldn't think. If you went now, you'd only have to turn around and come back for supper, and I imagine you'll want to get as much time as you can get. It really is spectacular." "Yes," said Aunt Isabella, "a marvel." After a short and pleasant conversation, Ava was shown to her room, an almost implausibly large space studded with comfort. Overstuffed armchairs, fat feathered pillows, and a great brass bedstead that shone as if it had never been touched. Iris, the chambermaid, had hung Ava's little bag neatly from the back of a chair, and she explained that if Ava ever wanted to change for dinner like the others — Ava only had 2 dresses, one of which she was wearing, and neither of which was particularly clean — then they would be happy to launder what she had on her right now. Ava could hardly believe her luck. Okay, so that's the first half of chapter 2. So she started off in this really nasty situation. She was pretending to be a psychic with some lady who was really mean and didn't like her, but she actually did have a psychic vision that was telling her to go to the fair, go to the fair. She didn't know what that meant. She hopped on a train and she happened to meet this kid her age who was also going to the Chicago World's Fair. I don't know. I'm excited to read the other half next week. All right, thanks for joining me. Have a good one.